This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
You're listening to Front Row with Samira Ahmed.
Hello, tonight we're riding the Fairground Dodgems with composer Anna Meredith, reviewing the winners of the British Podcasting Awards. And in the latest in our series on the book world, we explore the ethical tensions over free speech, writers' personal views, and potentially causing offence to publishing employees. Anna Meredith has composed for the last night of the proms. She was shortlisted for last year's Mercury Prize, but her new project, Bumps Per Minute, is a playful collaboration with the BAFTA-winning fellow composer Nick Ryan, celebrating the idea of the fairground as part of Dodge, an installation at Somerset House in London. At the start of every hour, when you ride the Dodgems there and bump into another car, her range of musical studies trigger off each other to create a beautiful, high-energy audio landscape. I went to meet her there this morning and have a ride.
So I was having a conversation with Jonathan Reekie, who's the chief executive here at Somerset House, over a year ago when we were talking. Obviously none of us had a clue what was happening, and he was talking about the normal ice rink that's normally at Somerset House at Christmas, and saying that he didn't think that was going to be possible with social distancing. And I just had this kind of light bulb, genius if I say so myself, moment where I thought, Dodgems, you should do Dodgems. There'd be spaced, you could clean them down, and this is such an amazing space, it's a box almost with, walls that's so enclosed and perfect. And then I quickly shoehorned, and you should make a musical version of it, to kind of get myself involved, where the Dodgems themselves become triggers for bits of music. So I've written 18 bits of music, one for each Dodgem. They get triggered when people bump their cars.
Can you describe what the idea is, what happens to the music when they bump?
Yeah, so it's basically more like a kind of shuffle. I've written 18 tracks that are sort of as wildly different as I could make them. They're like little characters. Some of them are sort of slow and lumping, and some are really fast and frenetic, kind of like Wacky Races, that 80s cartoon where someone's always out in front and fighting for airtime. And I've worked with Nick Ryan, who's made this incredible bump triggering or recognising mechanism. So each car in the footwell has a sort of suspended weight that, as you drive, obviously the weight moves depending on if you're hit. And it's very clever that it manages to register the difference between a sort of swerve and a bump. And if it's enough of an impact, it's a bump, and it will send a signal to a computer to change into one of these other bits of music. So it's a kind of fighting for airtime between these 18 tracks. Really fun to do. I was a wee bit somehow nervous. I had sort of childhood memories of how petrifying and scary and exciting the fairground is, but yeah, actually having now ridden them quite obsessively over the last few days, it's really fun. And knowing that you have a bit of ownership, when that satisfaction of when you do a bump and you hear the music change. And it's not just inside the Dodgems. We've put speakers all the way around the edge of the courtyard, and when you do an impact, there's these big swipes of sound that sort of surround sound that kind of travel all the way around the courtyard. So I hope it feels like everybody is suddenly, for the 3 minutes, completely clued into the Dodgems. And then at the end of it, the energy kind of goes back into the audience, and you can relax and have a drink. But there's a kind of takeover from the Dodgems just for the bumps per minute moment, which is quite cool.
You are a Somerset House Studios artist, and you teamed up with a fellow resident artist and BAFTA-winning sound artist, Nick Ryan. Can you talk me through how you divided up who did what in terms of the finished musical experience?
Yeah, so I'm a composer. I'm originally a classical composer who's now moved into doing more electronic work. So when I'd had this idea of this material being triggered by the Dodgems, it's very well saying, yeah, and then the Dodgems are triggered, but I had no clue where to begin on how you make that happen. And so Nick is, a friend and studio neighbour for many years, so we've never worked together. And, so I started to talk to him about how would this happen. And I think him and his team looked at various options. But it's a very clever coding that mean this, if you saw the maths for how this thing works, so that if someone does a bump, there's then a clever program that says, that person can't then rebump straight away, so you can hear a bit of the music and it's not just constantly jarring. So there's these very clever sort of algorithms in play that make it all work. So basically, I mean, compositionally, I've just had a really nice job. They're actually in a way quite old-fashioned bits of music. They don't have any beats, they don't have any acoustic instruments as some of my album tracks do. They're sort of like, so I've called the album version of this stuff studies. They're just little exercises in harmony and melody, and I wrote them all on classical music software. Even though they sound very electronic and they sound very fairgroundy, the actual generation of them was quite sort of harking back to my kind of more classical, the kind of commissions I was doing a little while ago before I was doing more band stuff.
Would it be too much to guess that, in a sense, the people riding the cars are creating a music? Can you create a tune if you were kind of hit the right cars in the right sequence?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because that's less my area of expertise. I'm too much of a control freak to hand over some of the you're more like a trigger. So you're not generating pitches or generating. I've done other pieces where how people drive affects the thing. Because there's so many cars, I thought there should just be more of a jostling for supremacy idea. So it's definitely more about one dodgem person, one fixed tune, and you just trigger it and play it. But I think you get a bit of ownership where you know that you've done the trigger, and it feels very satisfying because the lights all change and you hear the big swipes of sound, but you're not generating sound because I'm a monstrous control freak. You've got these sort of vintagey rock and roll dodgems, this sort of incredible austere buildings with Somerset House surrounding us on all sides, and then these multicoloured pods which are also vibrant and patterns everywhere, and hoardings. So there's a lot of different worlds, but I think for me that kind of strong juxtapositions I really like, and that kind of irreverence of being bold and just sort of having something that's playful and not feeling that that's somehow got any lack of merit for being something that's a fun or slightly irreverent experience, that it's got, for me, that also has loads of value in itself. And I'm looking for things that aren't maybe, I definitely feel like I just want to do something that's a little bit less serious right now. Writing it, I basically had to use quite old-fashioned ways of writing to create something that sounds, it's got loads and loads of notes. You'll hear, there's lots of running arpeggios and fast-moving notes, but I had to write them all, old-fashioned way, semiquaver by semiquaver, to get that energy. So even though it might sound like it's all, that maybe the music sounds like it's kind of self-generated or written in a sequencer or something, it's actually, because I'm such a control freak, been written in a very old-fashioned way.
There's an album to go with this whole experience for those who can or can't come. Tell us about that.
So I kind of just loved this material so much when I was writing it, and obviously it's an amazing thing to come experience in person, but I wanted it to have a life because I got so excited by the material that, so we're putting out this album on Mochi Mochi Records called, Bumps Per Minute, 18 Studies for Dodgems, which are extended versions of these tracks, but I've tried to keep some of the same idea. I'm encouraging people to jump between them, shuffle, to not feel like you can start and listen to it start to finish, or you can imagine that you're driving and get juxtapositions and try and get a combination that you like. So we've even made a little website, which I think is bumpsperminute.com, where there's a player where you can grab a virtual dodgem and smash it into another one to sort of trigger the music, and a competition that we're running to guess the names, because at the moment the tracks that are online just have their BPMs, have their tempos, and if you manage to match up our correct tempos, you win an amazing prize, which is driving the dodgems with me.
Anna, Meredith, thank you so much. I think we need to have a go on the dodgems, shall we?
100%.
Drivers, Bumps Per Minute is about to begin. Please ensure children are wearing a seatbelt. Both arms should be through the belt and around the waist. Once we get started, drive one way round the track and strictly no head-on bumping. So champions, buckle up, start your engines, get ready to rumble, get ready to trundle. We drive in 3, in 2, in 1.
Thank you, Anna Meredith. Bumps Per Minute plays on the hour throughout the day at Somerset House in London until the 22nd of August. It was a real adrenaline rush. And it's part of Dodge, a fairground-themed festival of music and food, including an immersive installation by Yinka Ilori. There's more information on tickets via the Front Row website. Now, all this week, we're exploring issues in the publishing industry. Kingsley Amis said in an interview 50 years ago, if you can't annoy somebody with what you write, I think there's little point in writing. He was thinking of readers. One wonders what he'd make of the rows in the book world today, as titles have been withdrawn and petitions signed by often younger publishing employees, refusing to work with writers they believe hold offensive views, suggesting the possibility of a generational divide. To give just two recent examples, J.K. Rowling's tweets on sex and gender issues caused an outcry on social media and within her publishing firm. And a new biography of the late American writer Philip Roth has been withdrawn after allegations of sexual misconduct made against his biographer, Blake Bailey. Back in April, senior figures in publishing, including David Shelley, the CEO of Hachette, gave evidence to a Lords committee investigating online freedom of expression and described a watershed moment for the industry in how it dealt with concerns of younger staff. He said, "To me, it's very important that we as publishers are agnostic on those sorts of issues and that there's clear regulation and a legal framework that we operate in rather than us making those decisions." Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Tanu Shelar, the chair of the Society of Young Publishers. I asked if the rows were really about differing sets of values between the generations or a failure to recognise the economic realities of running a business.
Well, our members don't think this as a row, rather a nuanced dialogue that needs space and time to develop. It isn't a case of either or. I think everybody who works in publishing currently understands that it's a business of making money. And this has been highlighted several times in the past. Currently, we're aware of and having conversations about the revision of copyright laws and how they could affect our authors' incomes in the future. Having said that, the survey that we carried out was more around the ethical and moral values of publishers. And according to our members, they do believe there's a generational shift.
And as you've said, you did this snapshot survey. It's based on 75 responses that came back from members. Do young publishers feel they shouldn't have to work on books where they disagree with the viewpoints, the personal viewpoints of the author, regardless of what the content of the book might be?
Well, yes, 68.9% of our respondents do believe that publishing professionals should have the right to not work on books when they disagree with authors' views. But having said that, our members also expanded on this opinion in their comment section, where they realized that there's a difference between working on books of authors whose political views they don't necessarily agree with, and between authors whose views infringe on others' rights to safety or incite hatred in any kind of way. I think most of all, they don't want to be associated with something that is hurtful or discriminatory.
Yeah, and obviously we should say this is itself disputed. What is hurtful and discriminatory? It's a perception issue, and it's clearly something that people do feel offended by, but it is disputed. Can I ask what the mood is among your members and, as far as you can tell, in the publishing industry more widely around this issue?
Members of Society of Young Publishers are publishing employees, they're freelancers, they're people aspiring to be in the industry. Overall, we're just a bunch of passionate book lovers, really, and we believe that this is a conversation that cannot be quickly resolved through a snapshot survey or a brief conversation. I think there is a need for an open and progressive dialogue, not just between existing publishers, but people who want to be a part of this industry in the future. And based on the conversations we've had with our members in the past, I think there's a fear that many have at the beginning of their careers, because there is such a competitiveness in the industry and limited access to entry. A lot of people worry about voicing their opinions. So there's a general fear that we could lose our job.
How far do you think publishing houses have been trying to deal with these concerns among younger employees, and how successfully have they?
Publishing industry by its nature is really progressive. I think publishing houses have set up a lot of networks within their companies and outside to make sure that they do provide a safe space for their employees to have these conversations. Training workshops on bias, they participate in industry-wide events where these conversations do take place. One of our members in the survey also stated that their publishing house filters books at a proposal stage if it doesn't match their ethics statement.
And you said that there have been examples of companies filtering out things that they would publish at an early stage based on their sort of statement of ethics. You'll know there are some people who think and some of our listeners who are book lovers and book readers think this sounds a bit sinister. They think it sounds like censorship. What would you say to those who think that?
We've seen historically publishing houses have been at the forefront to championing their authors. I don't think this is a matter of censorship, but more of having a nuanced dialogue. I think it's not as sinister as it sounds. It's just that people have been able to voice their opinions more now than before. Our members do state that internet and social media has enabled them to lay out their own opinions outside of the office space. They have been able to have debates about this, not being in a meeting. I think it's just that. I think it's just a discussion that's opened up.
Tanu Shilar, Chair of the Society of Young Publishers. Caroline Wintersgill runs a university MA course in publishing at UCL, training the next generation of young publishers, and she joins me on the line now. Caroline, it's hard to know with that snapshot of 50 people out of that survey. Do you think a majority of young publishers think they shouldn't have to work on books where they feel ethically uncomfortable?
Well, that's really difficult to answer, obviously. I was quite surprised by the SYP statistic. We actually run a module on ethics in publishing at UCL. And I think what we've found with our students is that a majority of our students think that they should have the chance to work on books that they disagree with. And that in many cases, they'd actually quite like to work on some books that they disagree with. But I think that particular nuance that came from the Society of Young Publishers, which you don't necessarily find in a survey, there was a difference between not wanting to publish an author whose political views you disagree with and an author who actually has a discriminatory approach to human rights. I think that's crucial here.
Yeah, and of course, we should say it's disputed what is a discriminatory right approach in itself.
Absolutely.
I mean, the sort of the headline is often talked about cancelling writers. Is that talk unfair?
I think the question of cancelling it, the word cancel is very loaded at the moment. So it's part of a general panic about cancel culture, which I don't personally believe is justified in terms of what's actually happening. I mean, nobody has an automatic right to be published, not Milo Yiannopoulos, not Mike Pence, but actually not even Michelle Obama or even Delia Smith. It's always been up to the publishing industry and to literary agents to make a decision about each book, about what gets published.
How far? Oh, sorry, no, finish your point, Caroline, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that publishers and individual editors have always had to make difficult decisions about what they're going to publish and to balance their list. And sometimes a book that will come in for whatever reason fails to live up to expectations, and there can be a range of reasons for that. But I think it's a very kind of marginal reason. It really only occasionally happens that they do so because of public pressure or staff pressure. It's not very common, and it's never done lightly, because by the time a book comes in-house, obviously there's been considerable investment of time and money on it.
Well, sometimes it feels like it's being retrospective or retroactive. How far is the row over trans rights, do you think, skewing the debate about publishing ethics and freedom of speech?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I don't think it is. I think that trans rights are a central part of the debate in the sense that trans voices are voices that have been excluded from mainstream cultural representation, and they're beginning to be heard. And it's very important that they are. But, I mean, I think it's always been the case that at particular points, some issues come to the fore. And recently, in the last couple of years, trans rights have particularly come to the fore in the debate. At other times, it's been issues like Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. And I think that's absolutely fine. I mean, I have to say that what skewed the debate to some degree about the trans rights question is probably issues around J.K. Rowling, which are very emotional, and young people feel emotional about.
You've suggested it's not a new phenomenon. Can I ask what you teach young people on your course about how to deal with these dilemmas?
Well, we have, as I mentioned, a course on ethics in publishing, and it's an optional course, and it's actually, at the moment, one of the most popular courses we teach, because young people recognise that it's a really, really important area at the moment in publishing. We don't tell them what to think. It's a debate-focused module. We give them evidence on both sides. We do a lot of case study work on the module. We look at current cases. We give them a lot of materials, and we encourage them to think for themselves, to debate, to work out solutions for themselves. we recognise that this is a difficult issue for young publishers and for older publishers. And, good luck to everybody who's grappling with it, because it is crucial for the industry going forward.
Yeah, well, one wonders, when these young people kind of, go through the ranks, take positions of power, do you think publishing will have changed for good to a more, well, some people would still see it as a morally censorious position? Or do you think there's a chance that as you grow older, some of these young people just change their attitudes?
Well, I don't think morally censorious is really fair. I think that young people are challenging publishing in really good ways. They've had really important battles to fight. We're doing a little bit better on issues around ethnic diversity and sexuality and gender issues in the industry, but there are still a lot of blind spots. There are blind spots around, global voices from the global south being heard. There are blind spots about working class writers and publishers. There's a great working class writers festival in preparation for October, and I think that's really important. And so I think young people have a role to play in all of these debates, and I think the moral debates go alongside those. I mean, young people want diverse voices to be heard, and I think that's the most crucial point. But they also want to make sure that marginalised voices are not discriminated against by louder and entrenched voices. And that's part of the debate.
Caroline Winterskill, thank you so much. And tomorrow we'll be looking at the future of young adult fiction. Now, podcasts have continued to become a bigger part of many people's listening and leisure time, and the recent British Podcast Award, held at the weekend, offered some insights into what's gripping us and why. There were 1,600 submissions and 29 winners. Laura Grimshaw, one of the presenters of Podcast Radio Hour on Radio 4 Extra, joins me now, and she has, of course, heard and reviewed many of them. Laura, huge range of styles and content. Tell us about one of the big winners of the evening, Vent.
So the series Event Documentaries was a collaboration between Vice UK and Brent 2020 London Borough of Culture, and the premise of the series was that it gave a voice and a platform to young people from one London borough. So Brent 2020 approached Vice for funding, and then they got a small team together, some of whom were from Brent, and that team produced about 100 podcasts last year. And one of those series was Vent Documentaries, which won three awards. It won 2 Gold Awards and Podcast of the Year. And the senior producer was Jessie Lawson, and the producers Ali Adlington, and they worked really closely with young voices who wouldn't otherwise have access to making audio or podcasts, and they basically made 3 series that all had a different theme. So the first series was about identity, the second was about love, and the third one was about justice.
And Problem Kids, there's a particular episode which won. What was it about, and what made it so distinctive?
I mean, it was about the sort of disproportionate representation of young black boys in being kicked out of school and in youth offender schemes. And it was presented by a 16-year-old called Lynette Nora, who hadn't done any presenting or podcasting before. And she basically collaborated with the producers. They kind of helped her identify the story she wanted to tell. They helped her do interviews. They gave her training. They gave her script writing training. And they sort of gave her the ability to write this script and tell this story in her voice.
Let's have a listen to it.
And that's the thing that makes it brilliant.
Let's have a listen to an extract.
So you left school when you was then 13?
13, yeah, let's say that.
So what were the circumstances that led you to getting kicked out of school? Can you set the scene for me?
I'd done a lot of wrongs, tried to be business-minded in a place of education, which obviously can't work. And that was the cause.
Okay, for those of you who are a bit slow on the uptake, when someone my age from where I'm from says they were trying to be business-minded, they mean they were shot-in. Okay, do you still not know what shot-in means? It's stealing drugs.
An extract from Problem Kids. The Best Lockdown podcast, Laura, it's a category that was obviously just created in the past year. It was won by Stolen Goodbyes, a simple idea and an incredibly sad one. Can you tell me about it and how it spoke to you?
I think it's a really important podcast. It's presented by Karen Rice, and she basically allowed some of those who've lost family members who've died of COVID in the last 18 months to share their stories and to give their loved one a voice and to keep their memory alive. And there's a lot of podcasts that speak about death. Carrie Ad Lloyd's Griefcast is sort of quite a high profile one, but I think Stolen Goodbyes is very particular to this time. I think there's a lot of us, including me, who have had family members die of COVID, and we've all been very personally affected. Absolutely. And I think because of our because we've been kept apart, the normal channels for grief have not been available to us. You normally gather and you get together with your family, or you try and get through it together. But because we all had to do it separately, I think the fact that this podcast exists to allow people to talk about their experiences and the shock and the suddenness of it all is a really, really lovely thing.
Well, let's have a listen. This is Karen Rice, the presenter, talking to Emma Charlesworth, whose husband died from COVID, aged just 45. The story is profoundly moving and very courageously told.
I fully expected them to say, yeah, you were right, it's a panic attack, can you come and get him? And so to then be told over the phone, no, he's been ventilated and sedated, and he's in ITU, was just, I wasn't ready for that.
Shocking. What happened then?
That's when my whole life took on a very surreal element, I think. It just became a waiting game.
Extract from Stolen Goodbyes. Laura, the Radio 4 programme The Skewer won Best Radio Podcast, as did This Thing of Darkness, a Radio 4 drama which won Best Fiction. One could ask, should podcasts of radio programmes be included in podcast awards? Does it blur the distinction?
I mean, I think it's quite good that there's a category acknowledging kind of radio production. And I think basically, what makes a podcast is that the audio is downloadable. So that makes it a podcast. And I think podcasting, the beauty of it is that it's available to everybody. It's got such a wide range of voices and styles. Anyone can do it. You can just record it on your phone. Obviously, some productions and some radio podcasts have a budget, and they have a budget for production. But equally with things like The Skewer, which is great, that has an open source policy for material, so anyone can submit money and get money to put material in for The Skewer. And I think the point of podcasting is that it's people doing a passion project. It's people who want to make good audio, to tell stories with audio. And so it's a nice mix that, at the British Podcast Awards, you get a range of voices, some of whom, are higher profile than others, but everybody is in the mix, and that's a good thing.
Now, there are two winners that are about nature and the outdoors. Field Recordings won Best New Podcast, Gardening with the RHS, the Best Branded Podcast. Another feature of how people have been spending their time in lockdown, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. So Field Recordings is a really lovely podcast because, again, anyone can record and submit material to the producer, Ellen McDowell. And basically each episode is like a 5-minute window of time in a place. There's no talking, it's just a soundscape. So I think during lockdown, it's particularly valuable because it's allowed us to kind of travel and experience new environments without actually having to go anywhere. And the Gardening with the RHS podcast, it's been going on for quite a while, yeah, but it allows people to kind of get tips on tending their own garden, but also there's lots of facts in there about pollinators and wildlife. It's
we'll
lovely.
Have to leave it there, Laura, but thank you so much, Laura Grimshaw. And you can hear her show, Podcast Radio Hour, on Radio 4 Extra every Friday at 11 a.m, again at 9 p.m. And tomorrow's episode is all about the British Podcast Awards. On tomorrow's Front Row, Quentin Tarantino on turning his most recent film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, into a novel, and a roundup from Cannes. Do join Kirsty straight after the news at 7 p.m. Thank you for listening to Front Row. I'm Samira Ahmed and the producer was Oliver Jones. The studio manager was Nigel Dix and the production coordinator was Caroline Day. And if you enjoyed this programme, you can discover more radio, music and podcasts on BBC Sounds.